Fantastic. One of the things that you will realize, if you'll do that several times over the next 2 days, there is some genius in this room. I know many of you that are here, you're doing some amazing things in your practice, and there will be as much that you can learn from each other as you will from what happens here on stage. So I hope you'll take the opportunity to introduce yourself to a stranger, and I'm going to give you a specific question to ask here in just a moment that will open up a whole library of genius that you can use in your practice. By way of background, real quick, my name is Steve Anderson. I am one of the founders of the Crown Council that is sponsoring this meeting. The Crown Council's mission is to help you create a culture of success in your practice. We'll talk about why that is so important in just a moment. I'm also the founder of the Total Patient Service Institute, which is an education practice management company. We have what we call practice advisors all over the country every day in practices, implementing the highest level of patient service and case acceptance skills. So on any given day, we're in dozens of offices, not only teaching, but gathering data. I'm going to share some of that data with you here this morning. Finally, I'm also a co-founder of the Smiles for Life Foundation, which has become dentistry's largest charitable campaign. Over the course of the next 2 days, we will talk about the power of cause-related marketing in terms of your community reputation and its power to draw patients to your practice. So that gives you just a little bit of context. Jack talked about strategy, and I'm going to suggest this model to you as a backdrop for everything that we'll talk about for the next 2 days. Usually when you meet as a team, you'll talk about your results and whether they are desirable or undesirable results. That's at the top of the pyramid, and we will talk a lot about results over the course of the next 2 days. If you're not getting the results that you want, then typically the conversation centers around the tactics or the actions that you need to take to get better results. You got it. Then, every once in a while, like here, you'll spend some time developing your overall strategy or your plan. That's a big part of what we'll talk about. Every once in a while, you'll plug into values or beliefs that are really at the foundation of everything you do every day in your practice. Critically important. Rarely, if ever, do we talk about what I call the natural laws or the truths that are at play that drive everything that you do. So as we go through the material that we'll talk about while we're together, I'm going to challenge you to focus at the foundation, which is not just what are you going to do, but what are the truths that are at play that remain constant, that you can build your beliefs, your strategy, your tactics, everything that you do in your practice. I'll suggest a couple of natural laws first thing this morning that are immutable, constant, enduring truths that drive results every day in your practice. Now, here's one of them. One of the things we know has not changed over the decades in dentistry is that today, even in the advent of social media and online reviews and internet, we know today that consumers prefer, when given the choice, would prefer to choose their dentist in their dental office based on what? The credible reputation, referral, or endorsement of someone that they feel connected to or someone that they trust. Word of mouth still drives dentistry. This is based on the latest research on consumer preferences. Online reviews are considered to be word of mouth. What you do in social media and people sharing things on their social media is a form of word of mouth. And it all traces back to this one truth is people trust people, especially people they know. And you'll see that theme throughout everything that we'll talk about. That has not changed. So, word of mouth, what is it that people talk about? When they talk about you, what do they talk about? Do they talk about your amazing crowns or your occlusal abilities, or maybe your shade matching. They don't talk about that. What do they talk about? They talk about their experience in your practice. We call it your practice culture. It's the foundation that drives word of mouth. I'm going to suggest a couple of things about culture this morning to think about as you build your entire strategy. The stronger the culture, the easier the digital marketing job. The worse the culture, the harder and the steeper the climb we have to make. You can't fake culture, especially in an era of social media where we're sharing everything. I'm sure there are things that have happened in your practice from time to time. You thought, ooh, let's not share that on social media. So the better the culture, the easier the marketing job is. Here's a definition of culture. Culture is the combination of priorities, in other words, what you deem to be important, and processes, or how you execute what you do, your systems in your practice. So priorities and processes, and how an organization, like your practice, and the people in it, your entire team, act on them daily. So here's the two pillars. Priorities, what matters to you most in your practice, what you believe in the most, and then the systems you put in place to execute on those priorities and values. It's how your entire team executes on a daily basis. That is what culture is all about. It's how you live your beliefs every day, and then that gets communicated by word of mouth over and over and over again. So how do you create and maintain culture that is word of mouth worthy, that compels your patients to talk about it, to talk about your culture and their experience? I'm going to suggest two natural laws that are at the foundation of a great culture. Here's the first one. It's what we call the law of emotion. It is a natural law. It's how we're wired as human beings. And this is what it says.
Law of emotion. People primarily make decisions emotionally, then justify their decisions with logic. We are experts at rationalizing our otherwise irrational behavior after the fact.
We make decisions emotionally, and then we justify that emotional decision with logic. How many of you ever had one of those days in your practice where you swore that every single patient that came in that day forgot their meds? Anybody had one of those? It was like the full moon, and all of the behavior seemed totally irrational. Here's what we know about decision making. In all of the latest research that's been done on neurology, one of the things that they have found in patients who have been involved in critical accidents, brain injury accidents, where they have had to remove the emotion center of their brain in order for them to survive, it has rendered them incapacitated to make decisions. Even when the logic center remains intact, when you take the emotion center away, it becomes nearly impossible for people to make decisions. Now, we could spend an entire day just on this one topic alone, but if you'll grasp that we make decisions emotionally and we justify with logic. If your patient's decisions don't seem rational, it's because they're not. What are they? They're making emotional decisions and then trying to rationalize why they made the decision that they made. Now, if you grasp that as a natural law, then let's take that back to your culture and how you execute that on a daily basis. How many of you have a morning meeting every day in your practice? Great. Why? I asked a team member that recently, and she said, I've been trying to figure that out for years, why we do this. So what's the purpose of the morning meeting? A lot of them, to get organized for the day, to make sure you have a plan, to cater to specific patient needs. And could I suggest that one of the most important purposes of meeting together as a team, the first thing every day, is to build and maintain your culture so that you give patients something to talk about. Now, how many of you have ever had a morning meeting? Maybe team members may be in an office where you used to work, not the one you're in now because we know that one's perfect, but maybe in a previous office. How many of you were ever in a morning meeting that ended worse than it started? Anybody been there? Now, those of you that didn't raise your hands, how many of you lie about other things? Right? It happens. And if you're not careful, it devolves into what? The morning complaint session. Everybody brings their grievances to the morning meeting, and the whole thing comes unraveled so that emotionally, when we get done, where is everybody? In a state of negative override, and then we have to go face our patients. So could I suggest that one of the most powerful marketing purposes of your morning meeting is to create the right kind of culture every day in your practice. I was with a team recently, and I asked the doctor, I said, tell me about your morning meeting. He goes, oh, we don't do one of those anymore. And I said, well, tell me about that. I said, if you don't do one, why don't you do it? And he said, well, it just went from bad to worse, and so we just quit doing it. And I said, well, what do you do? And he says, we just have morning quiet time. They were serious. We got them back dialed in. And one of the things that we put in place is this one simple idea that I learned from one of my mentors. I have a lot of them. This one happens to be the first Olympic gold medal athlete that I ever met. His name is Lanny Basham. And one of the things that Lanny taught me about the U.S. Olympic riflery team is a habit that they have in their daily huddles before they start practice is they started the same way every day by asking, what is the best thing that happened yesterday? What's the best thing that happened in practice yesterday? What's the best thing that happened in competition that you just came back from in Denmark? What's the best thing that happened? And they take just a moment to share what's working. And could I suggest, from an emotional standpoint, to build your culture and to put everybody in the right state, emotional state, to serve your patients, that become the first item on your morning meeting agenda is the best things that happened yesterday, and share that. Now, granted, some days you may have to dig deep. Some days the best thing was the doctor showed up less late than ever before. Hopefully you can come up with something better than that. But the goal here is to share what's working so you can build on that momentum. Share on what's working, start positive, and end positive, so that when you go to greet your first patient, you're in a positive state of mind. A simple idea, but when you think about it, word of mouth rules the day. What are they going to talk about? They'll talk about what happened to them first when they walked through the door. They'll talk about what happened to them last, right before they left. And they'll talk about what happens most frequently in your practice. It starts with making sure that everybody is in the right state to begin the day. So that's my first challenge to you. My first action item is make sure you create the right kind of culture on a daily basis, first thing every day, that will drive the emotional environment, the culture in your practice. Next law of integrity. The law of integrity says this.
Law of integrity. We want to be consistent with who we say we are. There is a greater tendency for us to act in a certain way and move in a specific direction if we have written down a clear description of who we intend to be and where we are intent in going.
All right, so the law of integrity says that we want to be consistent with who we say we are. There's huge psychological research behind this, but basically says that we have a human tendency to want to be congruent. It's one of the biggest reasons that we know the power of writing down a goal. When you write it down psychologically, then you want to be consistent with what you have said that you want to be. There's huge implications here in terms of case acceptance. What patients write down on their dental health history form is huge in terms of what they will end up doing in terms of case acceptance. Let's talk about this as a strategic move in terms of your culture and what patients will talk about in terms of word of mouth. I'm going to give you an interesting case study and a little backstory here. I have a lot of hobbies. One of them is I love speed. Not the drug, okay? Let me clarify. I love to go fast. So one of my favorite things is my Harley-Davidson 110 cubic inch Screamin' Eagle motorcycle in my garage. I love riding. I love the water. I love going fast on the water. I live 2 minutes away from Lake Grapevine, just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Anytime you fly in there, you fly over my house because it's right next to the water. And one of my other hobbies is I love to collect organizations. I love to find organizations that are doing something particularly well, dissect it, pull out the truths, find what can be duplicated, and then multiply that across all kinds of other organizations like dental practices. So let me share with you a case study. One of the most remarkable case studies is it has to do with a cultural transformation worthy of word of mouth that is a great example of what you can do to create a compelling culture that patients will talk about digitally and will talk about frequently. This is an organization that was in organizational decline, and it had been that way for several years. It was in trouble. They put new leadership in place to get it out of the tailspin. And one of the first things that they did in reference to the law of integrity is they codified their culture. They wrote it down. Strategically, the decision was made, if we want to have a stronger culture, we better decide what it is, so let's put it in writing. So a new set of rules were put in place by the leader that defined the culture. They were very simple. Let me share them with you. Rule number 1 was follow the leader. In other words, if the organization is going to survive, we have to have structure, we have to have leadership. So everybody has to, yes, give feedback to the leader, but we got to follow the leader and support the organizational structure. Rule number 2, dump your junk. In other words, we are leaving the old culture behind. We are moving ahead in a new direction. This is what our culture is going to be, and everybody's got to get on board. Rule number 3, show respect. A great organization, a great culture is built on mutual respect of people working with people and respecting each other and showing that on a daily basis. Respect is granted, it is given, it is not earned. In other words, you don't wait for someone to earn your respect. You gift that to them. Rule number 4, show up. Show up for the important things. In other words, there's events, there's things that we do that are cultural glue. You gotta show up because that's what creates our culture. Rule number 5 was respect others' roles and responsibilities. In other words, everyone has a role to play, and we need to support that role and help them be successful in their role. Rule number 6 was respect each other's livelihood. In other words, there are lives that depend on every single person in the organization. Their livelihood is supporting entire families, entire family networks. So you respect that. It's not just the person in front of you, but all the lives that depend on them. Rule number 7, honor the working relationships that other people have. In other words, teams work because of the relationships of the team members. Support those relationships and make them work. Rule number 8, don't take what's not yours. In other words, a great organization has to be glued together by trust and honesty. In fact, it was reinforced with rule number 9, tell the truth, don't gossip, don't do anything that would tear relationships apart. And then finally, rule number 10, support and cheer each other on. Be each other's best cheerleader. Simple rules. Now, as simple as those are, how many of you would say that there might be room for improvement on your own team in one or more of those areas? Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, you missed the presentation. Very simple, yet very powerful. those rules were credited with rebuilding the entire culture. In fact, responsible for creating one of the most amazing cultural turnarounds in history. You've all heard of it. Who is the organization? What was it? It was not Amazon, it was not Apple, it wasn't Chrysler. It was an organization called the Children of Israel. Who was the leader? A guy by the name of Moses. He was real famous. He was written up in a bestseller. Had kind of a boring cover, but it's well known. What were the rules? The Ten Commandments. Now, take the religion out of it for a moment. Look at this from a cultural standpoint. In writing, here were the commandments. Here's what they were. Rule number 1, no other gods before me. This was a new concept. They came out of a culture that was steeped in polytheism. They had a god for everything. So this was a reminder, one person in charge, we're going to follow the leader. Commandment number 2, no idols. What was that about? Dumping the junk, the Egyptian junk, no more idols like they had in Egypt. We're not doing that. We're creating a new culture. Commandment number 3, no taking the name of the Lord in vain, right? That was about showing respect. You didn't know you were going to get a Sunday school lesson today, did you? Commandment number 4, keeping the Sabbath day holy. Show up for the important stuff. It's cultural glue. Commandment number 5, honor your father and mother, right? Respect the relationships and support them that make the organization work. Number 6, don't kill. Respect the livelihood of other people. Commandment number 7, no adultery. Don't interfere with the working relationships of other people. Commandment number 8, don't steal. 9, no lying. And 10, no coveting. In other words, cheer each other on. Now here's the lesson. You either have a culture by default, you just kind of let it happen, or you have a culture by design. This is an organization that at its beginning, its historical beginning, decided to have a culture by design, and that culture was put in writing. My challenge to you strategically is to copy genius here and have a culture by design that is word of mouth worthy, that compels people to talk about you on social media, that compels people to want to refer their friends and family because it is such an amazing culture. Where does that start? You decide the culture that you want. So here's the action item. I'm going to challenge you to create what we call a culture guide. It is a written document that codifies your culture and defines what the rules of engagement are for your team, not too dissimilar from what I just shared. Let me give you just a couple of examples real quick. This is one that's really important to me in our culture. Be early. Everyone wants to work with a team where everyone can rely on each other. It starts first thing every day. That's why we all agree that when you're early, you're on time. When you're on time, you're late. And when you're late, you're lost. In other words, if we start the morning meeting at 7:45, what time should you be there if you're culturally congruent? What time? Somebody said 7:44 and 59 seconds. Okay, well, hopefully a little bit. In other words, the only way you can be on time is to be early, right? So that is a cultural expectation now that everyone subscribes to in our culture. Here's another one. Be happy to do it. Everyone likes to work on a team with individual members who are willing to do whatever it takes to make things happen. When asked to help or contribute, team members frequently respond by saying, happy to do it. Having a willing attitude makes teamwork happen. Now, isn't that better than saying, no problem? That's what you hear a lot in our culture. Someone says, well, thank you so much for doing that for me. It's like, no problem. Well, what's the only thing you heard? 2 negative words, no and problem. So obviously by saying it wasn't a problem, it was. All right, so this is a small thing but makes a major difference. When someone thanks you or asks you to do them a favor, the response is happy to do it. So these are 2 examples of many. We created originally a culture guide that had some 20 different items on it like this that define an organizational culture. My challenge to you is to create one. Now, I believe, my own personal experience is it's a lot easier to copy and edit than it is to create. Would you agree? All those in favor say aye. It's kind of what this conference is all about, Copy Genius. So, in order to follow through on that action item, I'm going to give you a sample culture guide that then you can edit and modify. So we have an example culture guide here that you can pick up at the Crown Council table that has an example of 21 different things on a sample office culture guide, and along with that, a copy of our book entitled The Culture of Success, 10 Natural Laws for Creating the Place Where Everyone Wants to Work, and that patients will talk about. So there's a copy of this for each team that's here at the Crown Council table, so you can pick that up anytime over the next couple of days. And I'm going to give you a challenge along with that. On your table, there is a white envelope. You probably didn't even notice it because it blends in with your tablecloth. In that white envelope, there is a form. There should be 6 of them per table. You just need one for your team. We are going to talk about the power of cause-related marketing and what that does for word of mouth. And along with that, we are going to do some good while we are together for the next 2 days in the form of paying it forward. So the book is my gift to you. I'm going to challenge you to pay that forward and to do some good. You can do that by filling this out sometime in the next couple of days and identify a value on what I've shared this morning is potentially worth, and it's worth a lot more than the price that's on the back of the book, whatever value it is, and then 100% of that is going to go to Smiles for Life, to the various projects we have going around on the world for children and dental-related causes, which we'll talk about over the next couple of days. So that is an opportunity to do some good, to pay it forward. In addition to that, in addition to the book, as a part of this conference, while you're here, for the next 2 months, you have unlimited access to all of the culture-building resources that we have created over the last 25 years through the Crown Council. So all you have to do when you fill out the form, if you'll just check unlimited access at the top, we will get you access to all of the resources to help build a compelling culture for the next 2 months as a part of your participation here at the conference. After that, there's a nominal fee to continue, which is totally up to you. There's no obligation. Our purpose is to make new things happen in your practice. What we do here the next few days is important. What's even more important is what happens Monday next week and Tuesday as you move forward, what you put into place. So this is a resource that you can use to put those things into action in your practice. So you're welcome to fill that out anytime, and then at the breaks, you can take that back to the Crown Council table. Just separate the forms. You keep the yellow form, and you're going to hand the white form to the Crown Council team for a copy of the book, the culture guide, and that'll give you a tool that you can fast forward the creation of your own culture guide. So, summary, here's your action items. How are you going to start your morning meeting every day? What's the first question? Let's try that again. What's the first question? What's the best thing? Now, footnote here, the most powerful question you can ask each other in this room for the next 2 days, if I'm meeting somebody for the first time, could I suggest that you ask that question? If I met Jack Von Bulow for the first time from Temple City, California, I would say, Jack, tell me the most powerful marketing thing you have ever done in your practice. And when you do, you're going to get about an hour lecture from Jack because he's done some amazing things in his practice. We all have things to share. So I challenge you to use that with each other while you're here. Action item number 2, create a compelling culture. Do it by design. Create a written culture guide that then will drive your actions every day, that will give your patients something to talk about. Word of mouth drives digital marketing in dentistry. You gotta give them something to talk about. Now, will you do that? All those in favor say aye. I need a little more love and affection. Will you do that? Those are your first two action items. You're going to get a lot of them over the next couple of days, and that to get us started. That's where it starts, is you've got to have a great culture so that you have things to talk about and give your patients things to talk about every day.